The rapper's attorney calls it a witch hunt with an excessive show of force and hostility that led to a premature rush to judgment, adding Diddy will continue to fight every single day to clear his name.
They don't execute these types of search warrants until they believe they have an ironclad case.
So he had her backed into the corner, and he was like cussing her out with his hand in her face.
Later that night, Red, who was staying at Cassie's home, says she awoke to screaming.
He's standing in the living room area.
The mother of one of Sean Combs' sons breaking her silence about the 2016 video showing Sean Combs assaulting Cassie in a hotel hallway.
I definitely think more is to come. I mean, among other things, the indictment, which was unsealed this morning, the only person named is Sean Combs. Now, it says that he did all of these things in conjunction with other people.
The race is on to get Diddy into jail, and it's the feds versus Diddy's stellar legal team. But it looks like all the lawyers in the world won't be able to get him out of this one, because the revelations following the indictment reveal keep on getting crazier and crazier. And now, former law enforcement officers are giving their opinion on what they think will happen next. Now, let's start from the beginning. As soon as the feds raided Diddy's homes back in March, it was obvious that he was in some major trouble. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe pointed out that a lot of the federal investigation seemed to have been borrowed from the civil lawsuits at the time, and that since they alleged that videotapes existed of Diddy's crimes, it's obvious they'd want to crack down on it.
Why the search warrant simultaneously? Well, again, at the attorney's direction, we can now look to the civil suits for clues. And one of them, for me, is that several of these victims alleged that Mr. Combs and his associates videotaped these sexual encounters. So that is exactly the kind of evidence that you would want to go to someone's home to see if you could find. So I would expect that that was probably included in the search warrants, both at the same time, because once you hit one house, the subject knows that you're probably going to hit the other houses looking for the same stuff. So you're better off doing them if you have probable cause in two locations, you're better off doing them at once.
Regarding the so-called excessive show of force, he said what anybody would say, that they were doing their job. Diddy already has a history of trouble with the law. It's obvious that they'd want to ensure they protect themselves. This falls under the same reasoning of the rumor that Diddy's homes had underground play tunnels. While the rumor was proven false, it's not weird to think someone with his resources might have a hidden tunnel to make a quick getaway or store illegal firearms and drugs.
Finally, the roundhouse swing he took at the show of force, really kind of classic defense attorney tactics to try to turn around a bad press day. But in fact, Mr. Combs has a long history of being investigated for things like assaults, harassment, threatening people with baseball bats and kettlebells and things like that. And the way it works in law enforcement is when you are planning a search warrant, if you have any information, and it doesn't have to be a criminal conviction, just intelligence that indicates that someone who's going to be at that residence may have a violent history or have armed themselves against people in the past, you're going to automatically qualify that search warrant or classify it as armed and dangerous. And that classification alone brings an additional level of protection, of tactical preparedness to ensure that there's no problems, that everything is done in as safe a way as possible. So I think what we saw yesterday was understandable in the context of an armed and dangerous warrant.
All right, Andrew McCabe, thanks for...
Jaguar Wright also had only one thing to say, that they were doing their job. If the feds have reason to believe there's illegal activity going on in his homes, then it's obvious they'd be strict.
That it was Diddy's house over there in Beverly Hills around the corner from the Playboy Mansion. They didn't know until they seen the kids.
So what are your thoughts on the show of force, even not knowing?
They did their job. He's a sex worker. He's got guns and he's got semen-coated fucking VHS tapes. I would have went in a hazmat suit.
And now that the indictment has been revealed, the way they cleaned out his mansions seems to make sense. At the time, videos went viral on social media showing the state his homes were left in, and people knew that they could expect something big in the coming months.
You arrested me just because we want to have a good time.
Multiple safes broken into, drawers ripped open, closets ransacked, boxes of gun ammo, and Grammy Awards. New images from TMZ show inside Diddy's ransacked Beverly Hills mansion during the coast-to-coast raids where no arrests were made.
People in the home are traditionally detained during raids, so they don't flee, and so they don't destroy evidence.
The rapper's attorney calls it a witch hunt with an excessive show of force and hostility that led to a premature rush to judgment, adding Diddy will continue to fight every single day to clear his name.
They don't execute these types of search warrants until they believe they have an ironclad case.
Still, they were left mind-boggled when feds talked about what they found. From firearms, drugs, lubricants to IV fluids, the picture they painted was one of depravity. It's obvious his freak-offs were a level above what you would normally call a crazy party.
Combs allegedly planned and controlled the sex performances, which he called freak-offs. And he often electronically recorded them, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB.
They made it very clear that they have some of the tapes of these freak-offs. I think the prosecution is prepared to prove a lot of these allegations.
In March, Fox 11 broke the story that federal authorities raided Combs' Holmby Hills home for the criminal investigation. Court documents now reveal authorities located AR-15s, narcotics, and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil lubricant in those raids.
This is all pre-planned, premeditated, and well executed for a long time. And now these victims are coming forward.
Moses Castillo, a retired LAPD detective.
My concern is the victims moving forward. They're going to need a lot of support.
The point the feds made was that he forced his victims to participate in the freak-offs, bringing up his violent history.
Prosecutors say for more than a decade, Diddy abused and threatened victims to fulfill his own sexual desires.
When Combs didn't get his way, he was violent, and he subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freak-offs, and that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair.
And yet, legal experts are sure that there's more to come. Trial attorney Richard Schoenstein pointed out that it's very likely that the feds will soon start listing more defendants, and it will be interesting to see whether some are able to strike a deal to become witnesses or not.
For decades, the allegation by the prosecutors in the Southern District is that this criminal conduct involving racketeering, involving sex trafficking, involving interstate prostitution, involving arson and kidnapping and other violence has been going on in Sean Combs's ambit in his criminal enterprise for decades. So that's a lengthy period of time, a lot of people, a lot of geographic ground. This is a big investigation and a really big case.
Meanwhile, Diddy's defense is working overtime, trying to figure out how to fight the case. One point that multiple people have brought up is that they could argue that all the activities people engaged in at freak-offs were consensual, thereby reducing much of the severity of the charges.
You know, the prosecution's case is strongest the day it's filed, because you don't hear the defense. So I don't know. I mean, you know, one of the things that's very clear is that they're going to argue that a lot of this was consensual. They're going to argue that the freak-offs were consensual, that the drug use was consensual. I think they're going to have a huge problem with the Cassie video. But I think this is going to be a deny defense.
And for a lot of people who maybe, you know, they think they're familiar with hip-hop culture because they might see an awards show and maybe some music videos. Maybe people have always sort of assumed that there are these freaky parties that go on, and maybe in their minds, that's what they can be told in a courtroom, that sure, freaky parties are everywhere, and this was no different. But the difference in this case is the witnesses and the number of people who filed civil complaints that all seem to line up with the same kind of narrative.
But while the defense may try, most think he's still done for. One example is ex-inmate Larry Levine, who knows a thing or two about prisons. He said Diddy's time in prison wasn't going to be anything pleasant, especially now that he has been placed on suicide watch.
Hey, real quickly, all that commissary stuff, he's not getting any of that because people in the SHU have an abbreviated list. So he's out of luck. No stake for him. Yeah, he is on suicide watch. This guy thought he would have went home. all of a sudden he didn't get bond. Remember, the first night that he was there, he was like an overnight guest. When they told his bond hearing, now they checked him into the system, and reality has hit him. And I understand that he has a shrink coming by his cell to see him several times a day. And now there's talk about putting him in, it's like a bubble. It's like a cell that has like a plexiglass wall in it where they have inmates watching you. That's actually their job, to keep an eye on the inmates that are on suicide watch. Another error that I guess some warden told you this. There are sentenced inmates there. They're called cadre inmates. They don't have to be white collar inmates, but they're doing maintenance on the building. And the problem why there's a lot of violence there, they have housing units.
Former federal prosecutor Naama Rahmani pointed out that usually following these types of raids, it doesn't take 6 months to review the evidence. He says the reason it took so long is because they wanted to secure the witnesses and ensure he wasn't able to get to them.
Diddy is reportedly worth $1 billion. Many of these victims have sued him. He could try to pay them off through civil settlements to buy their silence. Second, Diddy could intimidate the victim witnesses. They may be scared to testify at trial. So I think the reason it took so long for this indictment to come down is that the U.S. Attorney's Office wanted to put these victims before the grand jury, have them testify under penalty of perjury, lock in their testimony so something doesn't happen at trial. I don't think it took 6 months for the agents to review the electronic evidence that was seized from the homes. And this is the type of case that will certainly go to trial for a couple of reasons. There's really no deal that the U.S. Attorney's Office can offer, and it's certainly not one that Diddy will accept. It would involve decades in federal prison. We're talking about mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years for both the drug charges and the sex trafficking.
Derek Parker, dubbed the hip-hop cop, spoke on Diddy's arrest. He's familiar with the rapper since he was involved with his arrest back in the 90s. He revealed that Diddy wouldn't be kept at the Metropolitan Detention Center for long, but would be transferred elsewhere.
What'll happen is that he's there for, his trial hasn't even started. The lawyers are talking about possibly having a trial with him later on, and that won't be until next year. MDC, I've heard the conditions are very difficult, they're deplorable. As you said, the maggots, the mice. I had some friends that worked there, so they tell me that the conditions are kind of horrible. MCC closed, so all the prisoners now are going into MDC, the federal prisoners. But what happens is that after a while, when they get sentenced, they get moved. They get moved to prisons around the country. Now, from what I'm hearing today, it could be true or not true, I heard that he might have been moved to Newark.
No,
and taken out of MTC because they may have had that application go in, and it might have been granted to move him.
Wow, because we know that I'd heard Essex County, they had wanted, his attorneys had said, let's just get him out of here, get him to a facility that we can work better to get ready for his defense. But you heard that today?
I heard that today, that they might be moving to New Jersey.
Wow, okay. Well, and how does that work, New Jersey, if he's charged in New York?
It's okay, it's still a federal prison.
I see.
And they still have the jurisdiction. So they'll bring him back when they need to bring him back for trial or for his arraignment.
All right, so we have a new place to stake out.
Coming back to the point where people pointed out that a lot of people already knew what was going on at Diddy parties, one of his friends pointed out that if you were part of his inner circle, there was no way you didn't know what was going on.
All new to me because, you know, there's a slogan, ain't no party like a P. Diddy party, and that was true. I mean, the whole party vibe here at Howard University started when Diddy came to Howard University, more or less. He brought Biggie, he brought Little Kim, he brought Junior Mafia, and that was the thing. So all the stuff that happened after the actual party, those were private invites, and, you know, you had to be kind of with the sugar honey iced tea. Excuse me, but, you know, people know what goes on at the after party. It's just a matter if, you know, you want to get down like that. This is the music business. I mean, this is not for the weak.
And to your point, you know, many in the music community, they've kept quiet after these allegations. Why do you think that is?
A lot of them might be on them tapes, girl. You know, they seized a lot of tapes. If it's true that he recorded every time you came into a studio, into his house, he knows a lot of famous people.
Legal affairs journalist Megan Cuniff pointed out that his friends might be a good way for federal prosecutors to make sure the case goes their way as well, as it would give them more time to investigate Diddy and build a solid case.
It's a question of that, but when you read through the indictment, it's pretty clear who could be indicted as a co-conspirator. Right now, there are people in the indictment who would be considered unnamed co-conspirators, but clearly have played a role in this conspiracy. And I think prosecutors have some big leverage on them because they're hoping that they testify against Diddy as prosecution witnesses. But if they're co-defendants, there's a little bit more leverage there to work out some kind of cooperation deal to ensure their testimony, or perhaps there's bigger fish in the pond that they want to go after, but there's just a lot of questions that remain to be seen about whether there's a superseding indictment and whether it includes co-defendants. But there's also strategic reasons for the prosecutors to want him to have co-defendants, because right now he hasn't waived his right to a speedy trial, which would force prosecutors to take him to trial pretty quick, which they actually might not be ready to do. But if they supersede him and have co-defendants with him, it makes it a lot easier to pursue a trial continuance without him waiving his speedy trial right.
Meanwhile, more and more people have started coming out to speak on Diddy, giving the feds more fodder to build their case. Having Diddy in jail and their conviction to keep him there has given many victims courage, but that doesn't mean they haven't faced backlash. One example is Diddy's former artist Danity Kane, who has also filed a sexual assault lawsuit against him.
No, there has not been any response as of date to our civil complaint. I assume in time there will be some sort of response from the multiple defendants in the lawsuit, but at this point we have not received any response.
And does your client have a reaction now to Mr. Combs' arrest and the charges that have been waged against him in the days since?
Well, it was very difficult for my client, of course, to file this lawsuit. As you know, she filed using her own name, Dawn Richard, as opposed to a Jane Doe, which she would have had the right to in the Southern District of New York. So it was very brave of her and very difficult, because anytime someone is brave enough to sue or to bring charges or allegations against someone as powerful and prominent as Mr. Combs, you face backlash, and she has faced some online backlash. So seeing the indictment and seeing specifically how similar the allegations were between our civil lawsuit and the indictment, like I said, with the sex trafficking claim, the forced labor claim, that's been validating. It's been encouraging for her, and it's certainly helping her through what's been a very difficult process.
Now, let's wait and see what else the feds are going to reveal about Diddy and his freak-offs. The question now is, are even more victims going to come forward? And will they name others who helped Diddy rise to power? That's it for now. Don't forget to tell us what you think in the comments below. For more updates, hit the bell icon.